When I was growing up in church, it seemed like once a year, every year, we had what was called Stewardship Sunday. And that was always the Sunday when the pastor would preach about giving money to the church. And it was so consistent that over time, I really began to associate the word stewardship with giving. And I actually thought they were synonyms. And it wasn't for a long time that I learned that that understanding of stewardship is far too narrow. Actually, stewardship does, of course, involve money, and it does include giving, but it's far broader than that, as you probably know. In fact, it's as broad, really, as the whole world. The word steward is a synonym, but it's not a synonym for giver. It's a synonym for manager. A steward is one who manages someone else's resources. And so stewardship really is about everything. All of life is a stewardship. Everything we have, our time, our talent, our treasure, all of it belongs to God. He's the owner, and we're the manager. Now, in the past, we have preached sermon series on stewardship that were broadly focused. And we talked about managing our time for God and managing our resources, managing our abilities and all those sort of things. But for the next 4 weeks, in May, every sermon and every Sunday school class is going to be focused on a very narrow view of stewardship. We're going to be talking almost exclusively about money. And even more particularly, we're going to be talking specifically about giving money away. Now, I'd like you to just pause for a moment and just notice your emotional reaction to that announcement. Okay. As I tell you that for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about giving money away. How does that make you feel? Does this offend you? Does it make you nervous? Do you feel uneasy? Wish we would talk about something else? Well, if so, then you probably have an unbiblical view of money. Now, I don't say that. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm not trying to put you down. But I am trying to point out to you that those who have a biblical view of money don't get offended or threatened by money sermons. In fact, they get excited. So I want you to pay very careful attention to your emotional reaction to this sermon series. And if you feel upset or unsettled by it, then I want you to pay very careful attention to this series of sermons in particular, because you might be mistaken about money. And I want to say more about that in a little bit, and it should make more sense later. Now, periodically, someone will do a survey, grand surveys of people who do not attend church. And when they're asked, why don't you go to church? One of the single most common answers is this: the church is just after my money. And I'm sure you've heard that. It seems like all they ever do is ask for more money. Now, as pastors, that puts us in a potentially awkward position, doesn't it? Because I just announced that for the next 4 weeks, we're going to do nothing but talk about giving money away. So I want to start out right away by clearing the air. Please listen to me very carefully. Honest to God, we are not after your money. To be honest with you, we don't even really need your money. God certainly doesn't need your money. He's rich already. Now, we are going to be challenging you to give generously, maybe even more than you've ever given in your whole life. But before you say, aha, see, there it is. Again, the church is always asking for more of my money. I want to say this. We're going to be challenging you to give. And if you don't trust me, if you don't trust the church, you don't trust our methods, you don't trust our motives, maybe even don't trust our mission, then in all sincerity, I want to say, give the money away somewhere else. Seriously, give the money to someone else. I would so much rather that you give the money to God somewhere else than not to give at all. Because if you do that, you're going to miss out on the tremendous blessing of God in your life, and you're going to miss out on an adventure of a lifetime. So I'm telling you, we're not after your money, but some of you might not believe that. And if you don't believe me, give it to Billy Graham. Give it to Compassion International. There are many different conduits by which you could give to God. It almost doesn't matter. Just pick one and give it to him. Please do not miss out on this opportunity because you suspect that this is some kind of self-serving attempt to manipulate you. Again, we are not after your money. Do you know what we're after? We're after your obedience and therefore your blessing. Okay. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment that you're not at home, not just here, but maybe you're at work or maybe you're out of town on an errand and your cell phone rings. And the person on the other end says, your house caught fire and burned to the ground. They couldn't salvage anything. It's a total loss. How would that make you feel? More importantly, how do you think you would respond to that? Well, it's interesting. Several hundred years ago, almost that exact scenario happened to a man named John Wesley, minus the cell phone part. Man rode up on his horse to Mr. Wesley and said, something terrible had happened. Your house just burned to the ground. And Mr. Wesley weighed that carefully, and then he calmly replied, no, sir. The Lord's house burned to the ground, and that's one fewer responsibility for me. Now, you probably agree with me that that's probably not a typical response to that kind of news. That's not really normal. So I have to ask, was John Wesley crazy? I mean, was he just out of touch with reality? On the contrary, he was fully grounded in the reality that the house he happened to live in didn't belong to him at all. It belonged to God, and he was merely the manager of that house. We're the ones who are crazy. When we act as if our possessions really belong to us, we have quite literally lost touch with reality itself. We're living in a fantasy world of our own distorted imagination because the fact and the reality is that nothing really belongs to us. Not even us. In his book that I'm sure some of you have read, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis said something that I think I would like to quote to you at length. This is what he wrote. Every faculty you have, your power of thinking or of moving your limbs from moment to moment is given you by God. If you devoted every moment of your whole life exclusively to his service, and you could not give him anything that was not, in a sense, his own already. So that when we talk of a man doing anything for God or giving anything to God, I will tell you what it's like. It's like a small child going to his father and saying, Daddy, give me 6 pence to buy you a birthday present. Of course, the father does, and he is pleased with the child's present. It's all very nice and proper, but only an idiot would think the father is 6 pence to the good on the transaction. Now, perhaps you've heard of the band, 6 Pence, None the Richer. 6 Pence, None the Richer. They draw the name of their band from that passage of his book. You see, our giving is really returning. We don't ever really give God anything. We merely return what already belongs to him. And King David really understood this. We read about that in today's passage.